Hey everyone, welcome back to the best year of your life. My name is April Seifert, and I am here with Vicki Robin, a prolific social innovator, writer, and speaker. She's the co-author of the international bestseller, Your Money or Your Life, Transforming Your Relationship with Money and Achieving Financial Independence. Vicki's also the author of Blessing the Hands That Feed Us, Lessons from a 10-Mile Diet. And she's co-founder of Conversation Cafes, and she hosts the podcast and YouTube interview series, What Could Possibly Go Right? Vicki, thanks for being here.
Hey, nice to be here.
As we get started, could you talk a little bit about your background and what got you going on writing about people's relationship with money and about financial independence?
Right. I think the answer is going to be disappointing, and thank you, April. Yeah. So my background is I studied Spanish and theater in college, and then promptly went on the road, as many people did in the late 60s and early 70s. So I had that basic, adventure of my generation, the boomer generation, that kind of adventure. And I happened, after some time, I met a man named Joe Dominguez who had engineered his own early retirement by the time, just before his 31st birthday. He said he was going to get out by the time he was 30. And he had a very, very simple, practical system that had nothing to do with, investments to make your money from, investments. And I was working my way through my savings, as we all did back then, because there were jobs aplenty. You could always drop back in. And I followed his advice and I invested what I had, and I lived for many years. I've lived ever since then, really, a free life, as it were. And my big impulse for that is, it's like I say I buy my freedom with my frugality every day. I really wanted the freedom to direct my mind and heart and soul toward the things that were most meaningful to me. I really wanted to understand what this world was all about. I really felt that the model of happiness that was dished up by the society had nothing to do with happiness. So really, my financial frugality gave me the freedom to do all of that. Fast forward many years, I did not meet anybody. I did not read anything that was as clear as what Joe offered. And so I offered to produce some workshops for him. The first one was 20 people in the basement of a church. And in a couple of years, we had 400 people at a whack in hotel rooms. My driver at that time was bringing clarity and truth to people. And then I went to a conference in 1989. It was the first U.S. Hearing on this idea of sustainable development, that how are we going to reconcile economic growth and environmental constraints? And that had been a global conversation hosted by the United Nations for half a decade. And this was the US presentation of it. And everybody, all of the commissioners who traveled the whole world, got up to the microphone and said, we have discovered that we will never make it to sustainable development with the level and pattern of consumption in North America and the consumerism we're spreading around the world. And I was sitting in the back of the audience, and I realized, people who do the Your Money, Your Life, there was no Your Money, Your Life then. We called it Transforming Your Relationship with Money and Achieving Financial Independence, a big mouthful. People who do that program, on average, drop about 20%, 20 to 25% of their consumption. And they report that they're happier because they have put money in service to their values rather than their life in service to money. They've applied consciousness to the flow of resources through their lives, and they've realized how much is enough for them, and that excess isn't privilege, excess is just burden. So that process, which turns the whole thing on its head, results in, byproduct of, is lowering consumption, which is ipso facto lowering our impact on the earth. There's a tool that was developed just about when we were writing Your Money, Your Life, called the ecological footprint, that many people have heard of now, and basically measures your impact on the planet by the actually amount of material stuff that it takes to run your life, the metal in your car, the wood in this desk. And one of the findings that just struck me was that the greater the poverty, the lower the footprint. And
Mm.
so basically spending less. Now, I didn't differentiate between spending less on, some kind of food, other food. I didn't have that consciousness then, but basically having less money flowing through your life, fewer resources flowing through your life, as long as you have a sufficiency, actually is probably the most earth-friendly thing you can do. And fast forward to whatever it is, 40, 50 years later, and people are still thinking, oh, well, if I replace my hunk of metal with another hunk of metal, I'm doing something. There's no consciousness of the magnitude of stuff that we tend to believe is necessary, not because it's necessary, but because we haven't examined whether it truly makes us happy. So that's the background. And when I came back from that conference, I told Joe, this teaching has to be everywhere. We're going to solve the problem. We're going to solve it in a decade. So Joe and I decided, at the end of the conference, a man named Noel Brown from, I think he was Nigeria, and he was the head of the United Nations Environment Program. And he said in his beautiful English, ladies and gentlemen, this is the turnaround decade. And I thought, yes, sir, I am on it. And so I spent the next decade. I spent a couple of years writing Your Money, Your Life. So I actually wrote it. Joe had no desire to be in the public eye. So I said, let me edit. For that decade, I probably did about 2,000 media interviews. I was on all the morning shows. I was on Oprah twice. I did anything and everything I could to get the word out to as many people as possible, because my theory of change was a one by one by one by one theory of change. It wasn't systemic. It's just I believed that we were working off of something called the Everett-Rogers curve, which is, if you get 5% of the population to buy into something, you've got it anchored. The next 15%, you get to that 20%, and it becomes unstoppable. So, but the fact of the matter is, April, we reached half the population in the United States. In 7 weeks, it was a New York Times bestseller. And, we influenced, by now it's probably 1.5 million books that have sold. And I'm very, very happy for all the lives, all the liberation that the book has provided. However, the big goal of moderating consumption in service to the earth, my basic mottos during those years were enough for everyone and everyone has enough. And that motto was enough for me for a decade.
Let's go there. Let's dive into that notion of enough. What does it mean for each of us to figure out what is enough for us?
Perfect question, April. So Your Money, Your Life has like 3 big ideas. And the first one is that money is not what you think of it as. It's not your bank account. It's not the pieces of paper and metal. It's not your plastic. It's not that. That is just the transactional aspect of money. But then around that, there's a psychological aspect of money. And as long as you believe, that I will always be poor, so it's your belief system about money and the ways you use money to solve problems that money can't solve. You're trying to solve spiritual problems with material things. And so as you get clarity around that, you start to realize, oh, I see, if I can examine my feelings, I can moderate my consumption. But around that are the cultural memes. We live in a consumer society where more is better and it's never enough, in service to growth is good and it's never enough. And that is all in service to capitalism, honestly. So basically, once you start to realize that I am basically living my life to support a system that I don't support. Yeah, people used to say, well, if I don't spend money, it's going to ruin the economy. I said, you do not eat a high-fat diet in order to keep your neighbor, the heart surgeon, in jobs. You don't, you don't like run your life by the IRS. That's ridiculous. So basically, and then we say around that really is the true definition of money, which is money is nothing of those things. Money is something that you exchange the hours of your life for. Money to you is the amount after all the taxes, daycare, transportation, job costuming, after all of that, and all the extra time you put into your job. You make probably a third to a quarter you have of disposable income, which is a really interesting term, of disposable income. So that is what money is to you. If you make, $40 an hour, money is, you spend $10, that's an hour of your life. And then we would supply people with the actuarial table. You have X number of years. We used to say 75, but I'm 76. So I don't like that number anymore. Because I'm still here. But, we said you have a limited number of hours and you're going to sleep a third of them. So what do you want to do with your one wild and precious life? And that leads into what we say to every expense category every month, you translate that from money to life energy. I spent 14 hours last month on those boots that in fact don't fit, and I'm going to take them to the thrift store. And so, it's like you translate that and you ask 3 questions. And basically the first one is, did I get fulfillment in proportion to the hours of my life I invested in that? No shame, no blame, just in the privacy of your own home, 14 hours for the boots, maybe, I'm happy to go back to work for 2 days this week for this. I mean, the calculation, you could argue with this calculation at a very detailed level, but it's a consciousness flip.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the second question is, did this expense of my life energy take me in the direction of my values? What I say my purpose is, what I say is most important. 14 hours on the boots and an hour of quality time a day with my kids. I mean, you could say, okay, I could have an hour and a half with my kids if I didn't do the boots. So it basically directs your attention to what really you're trying to get out of the money you spend. And then the third question, we phrased it as, if you didn't have a job, if you were free, if you could invest your time in anything, would you spend your money on this? So that gets at compensatory spending. But it also gets at, a mindset shift of unasking the question. It's like saying, what if the opposite were true? These boots make me happy. It introduces the inquisitive question of what if that's not true? And so it breaks up, I don't even like to say this. I mean, what came to mind is, one of those icebreakers, but we don't want to break the ice, not one little scrap of it anymore. But it breaks up the mindset. And so people realize, asking those questions, that I am buying back my life. I buy my freedom with my frugality. I'm buying back my life. So it turns the spending money as a reward to spending money as a potential loss of what's really most important. And then the third idea is that there is something called enough. And if you keep doing this, you realize that, everything before your enough point is contributing to it: food, clothing, shelter, pretty rug, nice, that great black dress, whatever it is, or, the car, the second car, but maybe not the third car. And so you start to see that after a certain point, you're investing your life energy in things that don't equal the in fulfillment, the things that were prior. So you start to see your enough point. And what I said to people, I mean, I did this for years of my life, so it just flows right off my tongue. I would say to people, it's like, your enough point isn't like a static thing, like, oh, okay, I got it. I've got my car for life, my sewing machine for life. It's an active thing. And so it's a constant process of what brings me fulfillment. How do I direct my life energy to what's important? Am I spending my life energy on something that doesn't matter to me? So it basically is a consciousness tool, not a money tool.
That's so good. And I love how individual you're getting about it, because what it feels like you're asking people to do is to say, don't just chase and buy and desire the things that you're supposed to through all of these systems that you mentioned, but think about yourself and what brings you fulfillment, which makes me think about our broader well-being and the way that our financial health and the topics that you're talking about, how does that fit into our broader well-being when we start to be more conscious and more thoughtful about how we spend our money?
You know, it's interesting. A lot of this is very personal because we had to approach people at the level at which they live their lives. But the larger picture, as I said, for me was we are not individuals maximizing our self-interest. That idea is toxic to the earth. We are members of a community, the community of life. Everything in life strives for its own fulfillment, not in competition with one another, but in cooperation. That's what ecology is. And so basically pulling your life back into alignment with, not depriving yourself because you don't want to be miserable. You want to be fulfilled because you're filled with energy. You've made a living, not a dying. And so you overflow into the collective. We used to say that there's 3 FIs, financial independence. And the first one was, being conscious of, financial intelligence, just being conscious of your earning and spending and all the maximizing and optimizing and minimizing and all that stuff. And then there's financial integrity, which is aligning your earning and spending with your values, so that because once you're in alignment, like the force of the universe is running through you. And then the third one was financial independence, which I used to define as the liberation of your mind, and everything falls from that. And then it's, getting out of debt and developing savings and starting to live on income from investments rather than, current wages. But I realized in the last decade that there's a 4th FI, which is financial interdependence. That if you are violating the natural rights of the community of life, you may make it a certain distance down that road. But that actually, it's sort of like hacking away. You're on a cliff and you're hacking away at the earth beneath your feet. So that to me is, but if I were to lecture somebody about that, it's like, eyes glaze over. People don't want to hear that because they're so wrapped up. And it's not like anybody's bad. That's what we've been taught to do. Why have we been taught to do it? Because, it serves capitalism. And at one time, you think about it, coming out of the Depression, where there was so much delayed consumption, where there was, our parents wanted to save money. They wanted to provide a better life for their children. That meme came out of some drive for well-being, but it was distorted consciously and intentionally in the early 70s to convincing people to want what they don't need in service to the basically the the mechanism of industry. And it sounds like I'm anti-capitalist, and I don't have some big idea of the replacement system, but I know that this is toxic. And so if you want to say, I'm into taming capitalism, I'm into teaching people to be good capitalists, save your money and, invest it in such a way that aligns with your values and free up your time to do good in the world.
In the circumstances around which, you think about what happened, after the Depression, that set of circumstances where maybe people's goals and needs were of one kind might not be the same as the circumstances we're in today. And so naturally, something like capitalism should grow and change as those needs and the environment and the context changes around it. But we seem so rigid that we can't touch it, when really in any sort of, I know you and I both subscribe to the School of Life Design naturally is an iterative process and it shapes over time. And so I hear what you're saying in that, how do we take into account everything in the context that we're in now and do better? And your concept of interdependence rings so true to that, because has never been a time where we truly need to take that collaborative, interdependent community focus in all aspects of life.
Yeah. And I think, what I came around to after having taught Your Money, Your Life for 10 years, and having this goal that we were going to transform the way Americans think about earn, spend money by the year 2000. I had the millennium. It's like I was young and I was idealistic. So, or I was younger. I wasn't as young. But I realized in my teaching that it was the definition of freedom itself in America that was it was the poison pill. Because we think of freedom as our entitlement to do whatever we want, whenever we want, and you can't stop me unless it's against the law. And then it's just, maybe you won't catch me. It's entitlement. And, there's people who fought for the freedoms, but they weren't fighting for your entitlement. They were fighting for your ability to design your life in alignment with your values, to not be crushed by feudal lords, the king, and so it was a big experiment. And so I wrote a book about freedom and limits, and basically saying, there is no freedom without limits. This is like a ridiculous, the only freedom is spiritual freedom. The only true freedom is the freedom to expand in time, space, or consciousness. But we are trying to gain spiritual freedom through material ends, and that is a failed game, as we said in Your Money, Your Life. And so I said, the Western mind believes in freedom from and freedom to, freedom from domination and freedom to do as I please and as I choose. But there's two other freedoms that are necessary and are a necessary component of that. And there's the freedom for, what is the design? What's the set of principles and values that you are designing your life around? Because freedom, you can't get freedom because you're already free. Freedom is coursing through your life. The problem is, what limits do you set to design the outcomes that you want? So that's freedom for. We're not taught that. And so you are the author of the limits in your life that guide you to the future you want. Limits are not in the way. They are the way. They're the design tools of freedom. So, and then the fourth freedom is the completely impossible one until you become, sort of like second tier, what is that called? Anyway, you get into transpersonal consciousness.
Sure.
Which is freedom with. That thing I was saying before is that everything that is alive, and you could even include the rocks, because some of the indigenous people consider the rocks and the rock people, everything in life is tending toward its own ability to fulfill its own destiny. Everything in life desires the freedom to do that. So you are designing your life in the context of every other scrap of life designing their lives. So in some way, you have to design your freedom with everything else in mind, which is, you can't get there from ordinary consciousness. So I call them the freedoms that separate. I want to get away from it. I want to get away to it. I want to get away with it. And then there's the freedoms that connect. And we're playing this out right now with the COVID response, because the people who are, pro-vaccine, getting themselves vaccinated, they're doing it, because they recognize that social freedom is that we can move in and amongst one another without fear. So that's the freedoms that connect. But the people who are vaccine hesitant unto, resistant, they're doing the freedom from, I I have dominion. My body is sovereign. Nobody gets to mess with me. Actually I have, I'm in the sort of the vaccinated group, but I don't disdain the others. We just have different ideas of freedom. And so there's a maturation that has to happen in our society if we don't want to burn ourselves up.
Yeah. You had such a great description of financial independence a bit ago. And in your Money, Your Life, you talk about, this is getting a little bit tactical, but you talk about 9 steps that you can take on the path toward financial independence. Can you just maybe hit the high points, like give us a couple that
well, I
people
actually
should
already
know?
did. Basically the nut of it is you realize that money is my life energy and that's limited, and I want to track it, not because I'm anal. And my financial planner told me he wouldn't work with me unless I brought in 3 months of accounting. No, you track it because you're very curious about what am I spending my life on. So basically the tactic is you track your money, and it's anything you pay attention to will transform. If you go to unconsciousness to consciousness of anything, food, money, any resource flow, that is the thing that travels through my whole life, is the systems thinking about the flow of resources with feedback systems that maximize well-being and purpose for all.
I love that.
Yeah. So basically you track and then you tally once a month, and you put your expenses into categories that make sense to you, not the budget book categories, but the ones, you might need 5 categories for food or 3 categories for clothes. There's my work clothes, there's my workout clothes, and there's my, work it on the dance floor clothes. And those are 3 different kinds of clothes. And so you have to track that. You have to so you design your categories, and then every month you add up your expenses in each category, and you translate that into hours of my life, not dollars from my wallet. And then you ask the 3 questions I said. And that is, to me, that's the engine of transformation. And then there's steps following that are more the engine of, if you want to get financially independent before the day you die, here's some ways that you can continue this process such that you reach a point where your income from investments equals the amount of money you need to have enough, because you've already determined what enough is. And then some, allowing a little headroom for things that change, like growing old or whatever.
Yeah.
So, that's the basic engine that drives it.
And you have a more, I would say, comprehensive, holistic view of what wealth means. Can you dive in there a bit and talk a bit about pillars of wealth?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know I had some specific language in the update of Your Money, Your Life, which I cannot remember at the moment. But basically, wealth, I mean, it's your money in the bank, and the money that can throw off money. Wealth, you see, what we're trying to do with people, what we tried to do in the past, was help people build wealth, not income. And we don't, people don't even understand that it's the wealth, that the difference between, the everyday schmuck and, the captains of industry, if you will, is wealth versus current income. So that's, one form of wealth. Another form of wealth is your skills and your basically your competency in life. And God bless, Joe Dominguez was an engineer, and I grew up, as I say, I studied Spanish, I traveled, I did things. I wasn't stupid, but I was more of a humanities type, and he taught me competence. So I rebuilt the engine in my car. I built a motorcycle from a box of parts. I'm working now. I have a home built camper. I built a camper with Joe from ground up. I have a camper that I'm redesigning, and I love doing it. I can think in engineering, so I'm so grateful for my competency. I did back to the land. I know how to grow food. I've butchered animals. It's like I've been, the more skills you have, the less you have to pay other people. You have the choice to pay other people, but you don't have to. You've decoded what it takes to survive on this planet. I love that stuff. And then the another one is your networks. And it's not like, oh, well, okay, here's my list of skills that I need from somebody else, so I'm going to befriend those people. But the more you are in relationships of mutual aid and reciprocity with other people, and I don't mean time dollars, I mean neighborliness. I mean thinking about the well-being of other people, the people you call your friends, and just seeing like, what could I do for Sally today? Or like, I know so-and-so is going through a hard time. Maybe I'll give her a call, and I'm not going to charge her. I'm not going to turn myself into a money machine. I just love my friends. So basically your capacity to be relational is a piece of your wealth. As a matter of fact, I said, like, tombstone sentences. One of them is, I hope you're having fun. Another one is, life is either a great adventure or it's nothing. And another one is, it's a relational world. It is not a billiard ball world. This is not ping pong. This is flow. There's an energy between you and everything. And tending to that is the capacity to do that is part of your wealth. And it also, it could reduce your expenses, in many ways, basically all the expenses that you have, to buy happiness. So these are elements of, and then I think that also there's competencies. There's also this sort of, building many ways, multiple streams of income, not just thinking of yourself as a cog in somebody else's wheel. And I think that's very common now. I think, that's very common in the FIRE community, the financial independence, retire early, which I am sort of the accidental, old lady by the pond, one of the recognized originators. But that's what people understand very well, is that you don't just get a job and a paycheck. You take a look at all of your skills. And now, people just like in the pandemic, people like YouTube videos. They don't even pay for it. It's just like anything you want to learn, you get a YouTube video, and including building your website. Or an Etsy store, and there you are. It's basically, that's like competency in motion. So all of these things are our wealth, and and then there's also our wealth is the natural world. That is the source of our wealth. Our wealth really is a functioning society. Right now it's getting like harder and harder to believe that we have a functioning society where, nobody will fall through the floor, where society, yeah. And so without that, you have a scramble. So if you want that, you have to engage in the political process to advocate for the things you believe in. So it becomes a rich life is all of this. And unfortunately, we're driving into just the money part. And, with the FIRE community, it's always been, like laden with values for me, but there's an awful lot of people who are just doing the mechanical part of trying to get out. So I'm trying to provide leadership, for people to take a look at, what else is there in life? What can you give back to?
Because without all of that, how empty. Right?
Yeah.
How empty without the rest of it.
Exactly.
It's so good.
Yeah, exactly. I believe that. You believe that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're also a fellow podcaster, which I love. You have a podcast called What Could Possibly Go Right? What an amazing title, especially as someone who studies both sort of sides of the psychological continuum, including the thriving side and the positive psychology side, not completely in a vacuum, but with definitely an eye on that. You're talking with thought leaders about ways that humanity can step into a better path. You mentioned the pandemic. I mean, talk about a major shift in the way we live and think and our relationship to money and our jobs. What have you been hearing from these guests? What conversations have you been having about how we can emerge better after this pandemic, or even in the financial space, how that might change as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah. So what I see and what I believed going into the podcast is that we, if we don't steer our collective course, if we don't choose a better future collectively from this pandemic, it's going to be chosen for us. And, as I was talking about freedom and the freedoms that separate and the freedoms that connect, there's a way in which the consumer society thrives on separating us. If your marriage fails, then, in terms of, Walmart or whatever, Home Depot, we need 2 refrigerators, 2 stoves, so we need 2 of everything. So the more separation, the more the consumer society has toeholds in your life. So I think it's very important to choose, what in movements we're calling intersectionality. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the main things that came, is that I've been a little bit of single issue person, like, oh, this is the thing that's wrong, and I'm going to address that. Consumerism, or I worked where I am on some important issues to the food and farming community. But what I see is that if I'm not working on undoing colonialism, undoing racism, if I'm not working on that, my farmland will get occupied by a subdivision, mm-hmm. Because it's all connected. And so that's one thing I think I hope people, like the supply chains, we just didn't even think about the supply chain, like foods mm-hmm. in the grocery store. We didn't think that all that's in a grocery store is shelves and freezers and a checkout, cash register.
Right.
That we didn't think that food is flowing constantly from the global food system, but we're totally dependent on it. And these supply chain hiccups, I pray that what happens is people become more sovereign and sufficient in their lives, in terms of stuff and in terms of competencies and all the things we just talked about, rather than, just partying on when the constraints are lifted. Mm-hmm. I think that, another thing that really stuck out for me has been, and it continues to be, is the organization that sponsors my podcast, the Post-Carbon Institute, which is a premier think tank on resilience. And they had 4 focuses. They do have, equity, environment, energy, and economy. So they're a multi-system analytic and publishing, public education organization on these. And then one guest wouldn't cooperate with my What Could Possibly Go Right, because she just kept sitting there saying, why are we inflicting this pain on ourselves? She really was introducing the question of the pain that's in this world from mm-hmm. how we live. And I realized, if you can't feel the world, you can't heal it. If we can't come from our hearts in our activism, and I don't mean sentimentality, I mean the tragedy of what we're involved in. Mm-hmm. And so I've been very much in my head about it, I mean, I'm in grief, about what's going on, but mostly what happens is that my head takes over and it tries to create projects and systems and language and all that stuff. But the more I feel what's happening, the more I feel the tragedy of it. Yeah. And then another thing that's really come since the pandemic is the realization that, I don't think we're going to fix this. I think we're going to live with it.
Mm.
And there's something, I'm thinking of writing something. I don't like a book always seems daunting to me, but like my meme at the moment is life goes on, and civilizations rise and fall. And we're in a civilization that's coming apart, it seems, but life goes on. Doesn't mean humans go on or, consumerism goes on or your car goes on or your house goes on, but life goes on.
Mm-hmm.
And you think of all those people who lived the fall of Rome, all these the Incas, but then there were peasants, there was, we talk about the Dark Ages as if it, didn't have any culture. Of course it had culture, but it had something different. And so I really am heartened by the common people. And a lot of times when people are saying, oh, let me tell you what's going right in the world, what they're talking about is small scale rural projects, regenerative agriculture, community organizing. And so I've taken my eyes off of the big people somewhat, and it's very comforting to me that, and so it adds time, people on this planet, billions of people are buried in the earth. My life is a short life in a long history, and I can use my life now in service to making it possible for life to go on and future generations to not to all sort of live on the mountaintop that I have created for them. They are new entitlements. But just that thing of it, and I think that's the core of sustainability, and it's the core of resilience, it's the core of regeneration, it's the core of everything, is that life has a vitality to it. Once a heart starts beating, it doesn't want to stop. It's almost like Taoism, So I think there's been a lot of heroics and a lot of posturing and a lot of people becoming famous or making money or, monetizing everything from, down to their dog. But I think this other thing has sort of the quality of sweetness and maturity, and kindness and mutual aid. There's something in that spirit of life goes on that I want to presence. Another thing is I've been interviewing people in this season. I don't really have seasons. I just take breaks, but I'm very interested in how do we heal polarization? How do we overcome that? And so I've been seeking out guests who have insights into that. Like I had William Ury on, and he's like a long time getting to yes guy.
Yeah.
But I've had other people on, because I think this is to me, this is the nut we've had to crack is how do we deal with the fact that we've polarized the society? And one of the things is I have to depolarize myself. I have to stop judging the other side for doing it wrong, even if they are, And so I've been working on depolarizing myself. And it's not like I'm letting anybody get away with things. I am just able to cooperate again, to hear the pain that's in other people's, opinions. So the podcast is also my process of asking, what's up right now for us collectively, and how can I invite guests who have something to say about it? And I'm going to seek out Life Goes On guests. I don't know quite who that's going to be, but
at one point I did a calculation for a blog post that I wrote so long ago. And it was basically what percentage of the Earth's inhabitants so far and quite a ways into the future is your one life. And it is the most insignificant percentage you've ever seen. I mean, so many zeros to the right of the decimal point. It's not even funny. And it puts into context the small, finite amount of time that each of us has here. And to take that broader perspective, as you suggest, we have to come to terms with that, which isn't easy for us. And you're also suggesting, which I think is a great one to keep in mind, the problems that we face today. Have you heard the concept of categorizing problems as kind problems versus wicked problems? Kind problems being ones where we know the rules of the game. It's relatively straightforward. Things aren't super changing. It's very straightforward, one problem at a time, versus wicked problems where it gets into that intersectionality issue. It's not just a land problem, but it's a land and racism and all of these problems combined. The rules of the game are constantly changing and our next step is not known.
Exactly.
And it makes it very difficult because we as humans want to believe in the certainty and the clarity of the path forward. And I think that leads us all to this place of polarization because that feels so much more certain than looking at it and saying, wow, that's tough. I have no idea what's on this path. That's a lot harder to come to terms with.
Exactly. And that's exactly what I ask my guests for. I mean, usually they'll want to promote their, the solution they have. I say, I'm not interested in how we got here. No analysis or however much you need to do.
Sure.
And I'm not interested in your plan. If everybody did this, then we would be okay. I'm interested in the consciousness that got you to be a thought leader. And I'm interested in what you're looking at, in the near horizon. What you're seeing is maybe a critical path through. What you're seeing sprouting up in the, as the sidewalk, heaves and caves and stuff like that. There's always things growing. That's the life goes on thing. What do you see growing that we can cooperate with? Because my audience, we call them the walking worried. They're people who really want to do something that helps. But in this unclear territory that we're in right now, it's very hard to know what to do, and not being able to act on things that you believe could help is very painful. So that's who we're serving, and that's how we're serving them, to see more clearly so we can act more courageously in service to the common good. That's my little motto for that one.
Amazing. Vicki, this has been great. As we wrap up today, people are here at this summit because they want to make this coming year the best year of their life. We've been through a lot for the past couple of years. That goes without saying. And do you have any final thoughts, tips, ideas as people put into motion what they've been learning throughout the summit so that they can make this the best year of their life?
It's sort of like as you're moving through life, life is directional. I talked earlier about purpose. Life is also moving through you. You're an aliveness inside an aliveness. And so I think, to really practice presence, not as a virtue, but as a sumptuous possibility, to really take pleasure in your existence. And because I think doing that, you start to make better choices, not indulgence. I distinguish between cheap thrills and deep thrills. Cheap thrills are just, the momentary, but the deep thrill is the creation, is sort of like designing your life around your values and what you really think is beautiful. So pay attention to beauty, pay attention to pleasure, pay attention to to gratitude, and not that these are things in of themselves, but these are sort of like the directions of the compass. That's your compass, is gratitude, pleasure, service, just that, the helper's high. These are things that will put you in a position to ask that question of how much is enough. And also, probably make you a person that people want to have around in their workplace. It could be also functional. But I think those are things that put you in a position, like we're talking about with what could possibly go right, where you're gazing upon the horizon with curiosity and with a willingness to learn something new if you need to, or let something go if you need to. That the ability to participate in this living world that is living through you as you live through it, that, it's like, this is the true joy in life, as George Bernard Shaw said, being used for purpose, recognized by yourself as a mighty one. Because the more I give, the more I live. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a burning torch that I will pass on to future generations. So I think in elevating our eyes onto the horizon, while we're, grunting along in the daily life. I think that has some value to it.
Thank you so much for sharing so much wisdom with us. I mean, we've covered a lot from sustainability to financial independence to our collective nature and a community. Just appreciate it. Thanks so much for being with us for the summit.